Story 1. I had a mental break years ago from family stress and trauma combined with insomnia. I had become convinced that I was, in fact, dead. I couldn't process people's faces. They looked blurry and out of focus. In that state, I believed that at any moment the Grim Reaper would appear to collect me and that I had somehow been forgotten. I stopped eating entirely and only drank small amounts of water. A week of believing I was dead passed, and a thought occurred. I look sick, but I'm not rotting. I went to a hospital and started treatment after that. I'll never forget how real it all felt to me. Story 2. I saw people standing in my room just watching me while I slept. I asked them who they were and why they were there, but they only smiled and did not answer me. I also saw little birds coming out of my bathtub drain one at a time. I called my mother to show her and ask how that was even possible. Yes, I ended up being placed on a psychiatric hold. I am glad I did not see anything horrifying. Story 3. When I gave up alcohol, there was a period where reality felt like overcooked noodles. I swear I heard a violin playing in the background that faded away when I tried to listen for it. Time flowed strangely. I felt like I had lived for months, but it was only a literal couple of hours. Sometimes I thought, wow, I did that in 2 minutes, yet the clock actually said it was more than 2 hours. Story 4. It went on for a solid year straight and was a gradual descent into full-blown psychosis. I was heavily abusing stimulants for a long time, well, any drug really, but being who I am and how my brain is wired, stimulants gave me the best feeling comparatively. I remember the first spark of paranoia like it was yesterday. I was cleaning out my old apartment, having moved most of everything into the other one. By then I had graduated to smoking cocaine off of foil, then quickly went to crack cocaine. I took a big hit like I had done so many times before, and suddenly something clicked in my head. I stared out the window and thought, does that look like a police officer? It was like someone else's voice screamed it across some other dimension, like an echo already bounced back a few times. Then it got louder and louder. Every time I took a hit, I swore I could hear them, see them. I started reading novels in my stucco-covered walls. I could see all of the awful things I had done in my life written out in the patterns. Everything was critical. Every word was harsh and packed with vitriol and disgust at my current state. I could hear them tunneling through the walls. They were coming for me at all times. I would watch Apple Maps and truly see that it was a live feed of the police raid on my house. All of my neighbors were in on it. If they were outside, they had weapons and were ready to strike. The trees spelled messages to me, all from the police. I would see helicopters flying above my apartment, ready to unleash hell. They were outside my studio's door. They were waiting. They had planted trackers in everything. I destroyed every book I owned, tore apart most of my clothes, and destroyed every electronic except my phone. This is not even near all of it. And I remember it all. I'd smoke a couple grams and be on the floor bawling, begging for my life from the non-existent police who were about to break my door down. All of this was about a year and a half before I even tried methamphetamine. It got worse once I started injecting that substance. There is so much more I can tell you all. Story 5. Funny story. My boyfriend at the time had psychosis, which he still does, and a common visual and tactile hallucination that came on from stress was, there are bugs crawling on me. He needed a camera, a second set of eyes, or a good few minutes to discern the truth. The poor thing stayed over at my place in a farmhouse apartment in the spring and woke up from a deep sleep saying, there are bugs on me. I assured him it was a hallucination and that everything was fine. He said, no, I need you to turn on the light and check. It was ladybug season, and apparently my room was the Love Bug Hotel that night. I felt so bad and never doubted double-checking a bug hallucination again. Story 6. I almost jumped off a 4th-floor window saying I wanted to experience true free fall. I had 3 classmates trying to talk me down, but I just couldn't understand the concept of being dead or hurt. It was like I had no idea what pain feels like, and I couldn't comprehend the idea that it could happen to me. Then a 4th classmate saw me, went to the school cafeteria, got my favorite candy, and lured me off the windowsill with it. She told me if I got off the window, she would give me one, and if I waited until tomorrow to jump, she would give me a second one at the end of the day. I agreed. Somehow the promise of a Kit Kat was more compelling than the risk of death, lifelong disability, or broken bones. That day, 3 of my classmates walked with me all the way home, making sure I did not walk straight into traffic, and told my parents what happened. Nobody told any of the teachers or school administration, and I'm not sure why. This was 12th grade, and we were 16 to 18 years old, so we were left unsupervised at school frequently, which is why no staff noticed what was going on. I don't remember most of this, by the way. My classmates told me later once I was back in class. Story 7. I still suffer from this. I just live with it, but I always see this person standing in the corner of the room at times, just watching me. It was a guy we lost when I was deployed. The Department of Veterans Affairs thinks I'm making it up. No brain tumors, no rhyme or reason why. He just stands there staring at me but doesn't talk. Life is otherwise normal. Story 8. I started thinking this man, someone I knew from a professional context through a coworker and friend, was a crown prince of France. I believed, of course, he had his own security detail, which had set up a stakeout operation in my apartment. I was madly in love with him, and one day he just ghosted me. I thought he was protecting me by distancing himself, and that we could communicate through the police. This meant photographers in the bushes, cameras around the apartment, and my every move being watched. Even through 2 hospitalizations, I still believed this because it was part of my role as a princess to say nothing about my secret mission. I have more to share if people are interested. Story 9. Postpartum psychosis and sleep deprivation. I saw spiders crawling all over the ceiling and was terrified they would fall on the baby. Story 10. When I get sick sometimes with the flu or cold, I experience psychosis to the point that I tie myself to the bed when I feel it coming, just so I don't get myself in trouble. It's hard to explain the experience. It is always the same. It is a hallucination where something mundane suddenly feels huge and as if it is multiplying itself. It feels as if this thing will instantly multiply so much that it will fill the whole universe, and everyone will die. Somehow, it feels like it is my fault. When it hits, I feel like I am having a panic attack because of how dire this crisis is. I cannot think straight. There is only fear. One time, it felt like toilet paper rolls were filling up the space in my room. So I ran to my balcony and began throwing out the rolls, but they never lessened. I feel so afraid when it happens that I am willing to do anything to make the fear go away. Story 11. It has been a while since I had a manic episode, and I am not sure it is exactly psychosis, but when I was an unmedicated teenager, I had more prolonged and consistent hallucinations. I think the worst depends on how you interpret worst. I do not remember ever being scared of what was in my head. It was the lack of control, inability to articulate my thoughts or communicate clearly, the unpredictability of other people and the situation. All of the external factors were what was scary, and even then it was more frustrating and disorienting than frightening. The vast majority of my hallucinations were auditory, which might also be a factor. If I was ever panicking, it was usually because I could not process information normally and was aware of that. Imagine your legs stopped working. Whenever you moved the muscles or tried to move your legs, they just flopped around unexpectedly. While running for your life, it feels like that, but for your mind. Story 12. I have bipolar disorder and was diagnosed but not on a strong enough dose of medication. My most severe delusions were related to the devil, who I thought was stalking and following me. I was on holiday visiting my mom. I wasn't in full-blown psychosis, so I knew to hide it. I thought the devil was hiding in the furnace room. She took me out on a kayak, and I saw the sky reveal itself to be another sky that was red with hellfire, and the devil was enormous. We saw some bald eagles in their nest, and I thought they were the devil's minions. My family kept asking me why I was so agitated. A few days later, after a medication increase, the delusions calmed down, but I became really obsessed with the Bible for a while. I'm not religious at all. Story 13. During psychosis, I was often aware that I was not well. It was not consistent, with many changes throughout a day or from one day to the next. I experienced extreme mood swings, intense anxiety, and paranoia. It felt like psychosis was the result of prolonged stress. However, recovery from psychosis is a different matter and also difficult. Can take a long time, sometimes a year or two. Story 14. Severe trigger warning for childhood sexual abuse and other types of abuse. If details of such things can trigger you, please do not read any further. The last thing I want is for what I am going to say to cause anyone distress. When I was 14, I ran away from home after a lifetime of extreme physical, psychological, and violent regular sexual assaults. From my earliest memory, my parents beat me. My mother would whip me with a straightened metal clothes hanger, sometimes burn me on the stove element as punishment, and emotionally tortured me. My older brother also beat and raped me regularly, even rupturing my colon when I was 8 years old. Needless to say, I had never known what it felt like to feel safe and lived soaked in fear, confusion, and pain. I decided to run away at 14 because I knew if I did not, I was going to kill one of them or myself. Despite being actively suicidal, I did not want that, as counterintuitive as it sounds. At 15, I was heavily addicted to alcohol, cocaine, and ecstasy. The ecstasy was, unbeknownst to me, heavily laced with methamphetamine. The person I bought from did not tell me until after I quit, but I always bought from him and always the same kind. They said all of it was laced with methamphetamine. I was also heavily involved in environments that required fighting, both voluntarily and randomly when I was attacked. So that level of fear was still present. One day, after several weeks of being high and drunk every day with very little sleep, I became extremely paranoid that I was being hunted. I locked myself in my apartment with a knife and a gun and spent 3 days pacing back and forth from window to window, gun in hand, waiting for my hunters to break down the door and kill me. Every person near my place was the enemy and watched with extreme vigilance. It should also be noted that the whole time, I was still using cocaine and drinking while pacing. My girlfriend at the time was using those drugs too. She was also the only one I was not paranoid about. I spent those 3 days trying to convince her that the threat was real and I was not crazy. She did not believe me, of course, but thankfully also did not feel I was a threat to her, knowing I was not going to hurt her. We talked extensively after things calmed down. She said she knew I was not a threat because I was telling her I was more afraid for her safety than my own, and that she needed to stay with me in the apartment because that was the only way I could keep her safe. She told me she chose to stay to keep an eye on me. After those 3 days, she convinced me to give her the gun so she could take up my security patrols while I went to sleep. I slept for almost 19 hours, and when I woke up, the paranoia was mostly gone. I knew no one was after me, and things returned to normal. Story 15. Whoever is reading this, you have permission to laugh. When I was in high school, I often had rapid cycling with mania, depression, and many mixed episodes. One thing I noticed is that when my manic episodes start, the theme of my episode would be the last thing I was interested in. In summer 2023, I developed a strong interest in the song Tir Abhail Ryu by Celtic Woman. It's catchy, mesmerizing, and I played that song on repeat relentlessly. During the manic episode, I started obsessing over Irish culture and researching everything about Ireland for days and nights, which soon turned into an obsession with whether I am Irish myself. Now, my mother is African American and my father is Trinidadian. Any reasonable person would understand that there's not a single drop of Irish in my blood, at least as far as I know. But it gets worse. I started using Ancestry.com and tried my hardest to find a trace of Irish somewhere in my family. Why? Because in my mind, if I found someone who is Irish in my family, I could live with them in Ireland and leave my entire life behind. I remember telling my mother many times, I'm going to move to Ireland and never come back. Long story short, I didn't find anything. Then I had another idea to try to convince my mother to buy an Ancestry DNA test to find out that way instead. My mother said no because it was too expensive, so I went online and tried to raise money for the DNA test. I was able to raise the money. I think this is when the spiral started and the depressive episode began because I genuinely don't remember anything after this point. I didn't even mention how many times I embarrassed myself publicly on my Instagram story by spamming a lot of content about Ireland. I made many people uncomfortable, and it was difficult because not only did I lack a good support system to get treatment, but I also didn't understand the gravity of my actions until it was all over. By the way, the money I raised did not go to the DNA test. I spent it all on a large platter of sushi. Story 16. I've had two breaks in my life. The first came a year after my daughter died. I feel like the guilt and grief took hold of me, and it was inevitable that at some point, I would break. It started with hearing her. She was very ill, so it didn't sound like a normal baby's cry. Then, I kept feeling like I was pregnant again. It even felt like my milk was coming back in. I would start to see her in every baby I saw. Then the paranoid thoughts began, and I would panic that she was buried but not dead. I slipped a hiccup. I ended up spending 3 days in a mental health facility. I did not follow up with any aftercare and was never offered any counseling or bereavement therapy. This was 22 years ago. The second break came when I was pregnant 7 years after my daughter died. I remember hearing whispers that she was not going to survive and that I was never meant to be a mother. Then I would see shadows moving toward me. I would run to work to stop them from getting me. Eventually, I could not leave my room at all. I locked myself in my room for 5 days before my family got doctors and police to remove me. I was hospitalized in a mental health ward for 9 weeks. I remember not even knowing how to speak or eat. It was like my mind had shattered entirely under the weight of my grief and guilt. I was too frightened to accept I was pregnant in case she would die too. It took years of intense therapy to recover. I was given bereavement counseling as well. This was life-changing. It helped me realize I was a good mother and never left her side. I was not to blame for her death. I carried so much shame, guilt, and grief. I never talked to anyone about it. It crushes a person in unimaginable ways. It has changed my perception of grief and mental health. Story 17. Here's my story. I remember everything, every terrifying, confusing moment. I have a history of complex trauma. My illness created something long and elaborate, so naturally this story will be long and detailed. This is difficult for me to share. I thought I could reduce my medication and was under extreme levels of several stressful life events, both good and bad, lined up in quick succession. That's what did it. I truly believed I was on a special mission from God. I thought I was chosen and that my friends and family were possessed and persecuting me. Animals seemed kind because they sensed something holy in me. Colors around me exploded like bright mosaics. I believed movies were a prophecy about me, that I was destined for something extraordinary. One day, while on a walk, I tripped and fell in front of a church. To me, it was a sign that I had to be baptized, or my life would be doomed. When my dog was pregnant with a litter of puppies, I was convinced it was part of God's plan, that I had to keep one of the litter to fulfill a divine purpose. But when I asked a lady to help rehome the puppies, I became terrified, thinking she was possessed by demons trying to ruin God's plan. I believed I was the reincarnation of Jesus, carrying his spirit. When my dog was spayed, I was terrified. My head said it was the right thing, but my illness screamed no. Afterwards, I believed that procedure had spayed my own potential, that my spiritual and feminine energy had been corrupted beyond repair. I thought death and resurrection were the only ways to save me. At this point, I should have gone to my doctor and told him everything, but I was living alone and didn't think I was ill, just spiritually attuned. I told a family member that I was scared and felt suicidal. She told me that people who are really serious about killing themselves do it instead of telling others about it. I was profoundly wounded by this statement, so I wandered into freezing wilderness, thinking I might die but also that God would somehow protect me. I became dangerously cold and exhausted, then returned home and drank warm tea to survive. I feared the cold had caused irreversible brain damage. I went weeks without food or water, convinced my salvation depended on following strict holy rules like a video game, where good and bad actions affected my spiritual health, taking or adding points. Objects, clothes, even people had sacred or dark energies. I believed my left hand was bad, my right hand good. I was severely starving and dehydrated, which worsened my experience. A demon spoke through me, promising salvation if I obeyed his strict commands. I tried to purge the demon with a very hot shower, but it didn't work. Eventually, I believed I had died and was trapped alone with no other living thing in this purgatory realm, punished for trying to end my life. I thought God and heaven no longer existed, and that Satan ruled everything. I saw Satan watching me in my house. He had sharp teeth and the eyes of a predatory snake. He was salivating. He could read my thoughts. Satan told me my family had died because I hadn't converted them to Christianity. He possessed my dead body in another timeline or plane of existence in the hospital I had died in. I believed paramedics had implanted a chip in my brain after I had died, condemning me to eternal, virtual, solitary suffering. There was the virtual world created by the chip, and the outside real world I could not access or sense. In a way, this elaborate delusion wasn't wrong in the existential sense. My mind was indeed creating a world of its own, separate from real reality. A friend helped get me to safety, but I thought the world was an artificial holographic prison created by Satan and others. I wouldn't eat or drink, fearing poison or spiritual corruption, often both. When my dad took me to the hospital, I thought it was Satan's headquarters. I saw staff as demons. The hospital was a labyrinth of hell. I believed my cross necklace was the only protection. I refused most food and water, terrified it was made from human remains or demonic ingredients. I felt putrefying disgust and horror every time I ate, convinced demons were forcing me into sins I couldn't undo. After months of aggressive treatment, the delusions faded. I began eating again and was eventually discharged. I can't fully explain the terror I experienced. It was beyond anything I imagined. This happened as I was making progress in my life and career, and it nearly destroyed me. A really terrible experience all around. I have to start all over again. This is the third time in my 20s I have had to start again and rebuild. But I'm still here somehow. Sharing this helps me feel a bit less alone, and maybe it can help others feel this way too. It was pure hell, the horrors of a highly creative imagination brought to terrifying life. I don't ever want to experience anything like that again. Story 18. It didn't happen to me personally, but an old friend went so deep into conspiracy theories that he was convinced his neighbors had former President Barack Obama tied up in their basement. Naturally, he decided he had to go and save the president. He literally broke into the neighbor's house, the police arrived, and he went to jail. He received a lot of help and is much better now. Story 19. Side note. We need to eliminate stigma. Psychosis is much more common and universal than people realize. Around 3 out of 100 people will develop this illness during their life. Many people think it's funny, scary, or weird. But when you truly believe everything your mind is telling you, you cannot escape. There is no reality testing. Anything could happen, good or bad. You are just stuck there. This condition can be life-threatening. You do not know when or if you will fully recover, or when you will get to escape. People who go through it are incredibly strong. I believe that psychosis is usually a reenactment of past trauma or suppressed emotions, past and present, that need to be heard, acknowledged, or healed. I am not a psychiatrist. Usually induced by severe stress or traumatic events, psychosis can also be caused by both illicit and legal substances, as well as nutritional deficiencies. Think of it as a complex neurochemical event or storm turned protective coping mechanism to escape an unbearable reality by creating a new one. It is actually very clever. I also wonder how social media impacts susceptibility to psychotic illness by stimulating our brains with dopamine, but that is a question for another day. Dopamine antagonists, also called antipsychotics, are usually the first line of treatment. Hospitalization is often necessary in severe cases. More sympathetic awareness of this condition, as a condition, not a defect or character flaw, is needed. Psychosis is as destructive and life-affecting, especially during crucial periods of development in young adulthood, as cancer. However, people tend to look the other way because it is not them. Psychosis can happen to anyone without warning. Like cancer, it is catastrophic if not treated early. Check up on your friends, family, and neighbors. Psychosis is particularly dangerous for those who are socially isolated or live alone. Remember, this is a severe illness, not a character flaw or sign of deficiency. I want to normalize this illness. Many people are often too scared to talk about psychosis openly or too frightened to get help. Let us allow people to safely discuss their experiences. Let us get rid of stigma. Important information. Experiencing things that feel unreal or overwhelming can be incredibly scary and isolating. If your mind is playing tricks or you feel disconnected from reality, please know you are not alone. This is a sign that your brain needs support, just like any other part of your body might. Reaching out to a mental health helpline is a brave first step toward understanding what is happening and getting the help you deserve. They are there to provide help and support to those who need it. Your well-being matters. Psychosis is treatable, and many people who have experienced it go on to live rich, fulfilling lives. It is not a death sentence. Story 20. Worst. A premonition that consumed every aspect of my life and made me believe I would die, which led me to an intensive outpatient program. I have reflected on how it seemed to come true and found ways to grow from the experience. Funniest. When I was younger, I was convinced one night that all my socks were puppies that I had to take care of. I don't remember how amused my mom was. Story 21. I was actively dying from a heart virus and was in so much pain I was on tramadol just to get out of bed. The pain was so bad I accepted death and was waiting for it to take me, but I survived and am physically healthy today. The tramadol, stress, and pain made me see shadow people when it was dark. I heard voices when it was quiet, but they were either whispers or, when loud, not human. It has been a decade since I recovered, but I still cannot be left alone without audio stimuli because I fear the voices will return. I need complete darkness or I am afraid I will see the shadows again. I still have some anxiety issues, but interestingly, I have no problem sleeping alone in the woods. It is loud and completely dark, so I do not get triggered. I haven't seen or heard the shadows or voices in 10 years, but when your mind cracks like that, it does not really heal. It scars. Also, my body sense went out of whack. I do not feel my heartbeat anymore, no matter how much cardio I do. I have to use a tracker to make sure I do not get hurt. The only time I feel my heart is when I get stressed. Then I have post-traumatic stress disorder and feel the same chest pains I felt when I was dying. That is not much fun. Overall, 3 out of 10. Do not recommend. Literally mentally scarring. Story 22. I suffered from delusional disorder and psychosis. I had an imaginary relationship with a woman named Ivy. I thought she was sending me messages and emails. Unfortunately, the replies I sent to these imaginary emails and messages did exist. I was sending these replies to colleagues, friends, and some of my students. One of my students responded pretending to be Ivy, and we ended up having a year-long relationship during which I alternated between thinking she was Ivy and understanding who she really was. Ultimately, someone complained about receiving strange messages from me, and the university conducted an investigation into my messages. I did not know Ivy was not real until I was put on antipsychotic medication. I lost my career and marriage. Story 23. Sitting alone in my apartment with my dog of 14 years. To me, he looked like he was going to lunge and kill me. It was a battle of who was going to kill whom first. The psychosis was so strong I almost killed my dog. Thankfully, I am now medicated and my dog is still with me. Turning 16 this month. Story 24. It has been a couple of years since I really dealt with this, but around 2020, I experienced something that deeply affected me during a very low point in my life. Just seeing that and already having a stressful time, I went into psychosis. The images I saw every time I closed my eyes eventually led to the belief that my head was going to suddenly explode or be obliterated the same way I had seen. There were moments when the fear was so intense that I would stop what I was doing, curl up, hold my head as if that would keep everything inside, and cry because I was so scared. Even when I was at a friend's house, I would be fine initially, but then out of nowhere, I could not focus on them because my mind was screaming that my head would explode. I was scared that my friends would be traumatized by witnessing this, and I did not want them to see it. I also became very paranoid, worrying that my family was purposely trying to poison me and ruin my life. During this time, I became very distrustful. I even stopped recognizing myself in the mirror, seeing only a complete stranger. I would cover the bathroom mirror with a sheet. I stayed in the hospital for a couple of weeks as a result of this psychosis. The hospital stay and subsequent therapy did not really help, But since then, I have worked hard on myself to overcome it. Story 25. I have experienced psychotic depression several times, during which I was convinced that my brain was rotting and full of maggots. I could smell an overwhelming, disgusting stench of rotting flesh, and I could feel maggots wriggling around in my brain. The cognitive effects of the psychosis made it feel like my brain was shutting down because it was being consumed. Disturbing experiences. Story 26. The worst episodes for me tend to happen when I am walking somewhere alone. I see people peeking out from behind cars, bins, and corners watching me. If I look away, they get closer. Often, they are horribly malformed, bordering on inhuman. If I look away long enough, I can hear and feel them running towards me at full speed. I can almost see it from their perspective. It is like I am being hunted for sport, except the hunter can teleport and enjoys scaring me. Story 27. Adderall-induced psychosis. I had a psychotic break in middle school. I have religious trauma. I was having an episode where I was literally climbing up the wall. My mom held me down and tried to perform an exorcism on me. I saw her face as a demon on a doorknob. Her face appeared with every small wrinkle deeper and black, and her skin looked white and cracked. I was convinced that the rapture was going to happen at any moment, so I stored food under my bed in case my family did not go to heaven and we were stuck in my room. I have struggled with thoughts like this a lot. I have obsessive-compulsive disorder, so it is hard to decipher if some thoughts are intrusive or psychotic. For example, on April 20th, Easter, I smoked marijuana and did not pray that day. The Pope died, and I was convinced that he died because of the sinful acts that I and the world committed that day. Story 28. Alcohol-induced psychosis. I was convinced a group of people were trying to break into my apartment and bedroom to kill me. Story 29. I had a drug-induced psychosis around 10 years ago and have recovered since then. The worst part for me was the sometimes very dark and violent thoughts. I had visions of brutally torturing my pets, for example, and felt absolutely horrified and disgusted by having such thoughts. The worst delusions were somewhat mild. For around a week, I was convinced everyone around me could read my mind, so I became very paranoid about anyone noticing what I was going through. Luckily, it only lasted about 2 weeks in total. It left me with a panic disorder afterward, which I have fully worked through. Story 30. I was walking home from work in 2021 and smelled smoke. I was convinced, sure, positive that my house had burned down while I was at work. I rushed home and stood on the sidewalk crying because I swore my house was charred. I was able to snap out of it relatively quickly by going up to my porch and touching my house, but I will never forget the feeling of horror and the certainty that my house had completely burned. Story 31. I started thinking I was clairvoyant and able to hear thoughts. I believed people talking around me could be heard only by me because I had special powers. I thought my computers were hacked and someone was constantly watching me through hidden cameras. Even at home, I began to believe people wanted to kill me because I did not respond or talk to a girl I was deluded into thinking liked me. I started hearing voices, some of which I still hear. I thought everyone in my family was betraying me, and I cut my veins. I couldn't cut vertically, so I cut near my wrists. Lots of blood gushed out, and I was taken to the hospital. I saw my mother crying. After talking for a while, I decided not to harm myself again. Even in the hospital, I felt people outside were making noises and were there to kill me. After medication for some time, things subsided. After a year and a half in a new job, I started feeling they were plotting to fire me and that I was a burden to the company, which made me increasingly anxious. 6 months later, during the coronavirus lockdown, I started thinking another girl at work liked me. I developed delusions about snakes, feeling as if snakes were jumping at me and trying to bite me, including dreams about snakes. I started overthinking and felt sensations like acid dropping on my skin. Once, my lungs felt filled with smoke. I believed the owner of my company was using black magic to kill me because I had once joked about them. I tried proposing to the girl, but there was no response. I began freezing during work hours, often spending hours lost in thought, unable to complete even the smallest tasks. I did a few spiritual courses but nearly lost all my sleep after that. I started staying up to combat the voices. The voices began talking directly to me instead of just two people talking. Some things changed afterward. I became overly sensitive to sexual content. After a while, I felt many sensations, like someone entering me. Whenever I thought about something sexual, it felt like people were gathering around, making sexual innuendos. All of this made me feel horrible. To this day, I feel like some spiritual entity is harassing me. Many things happened in between. I am sorry for speeding through. So many things were going on in my mind that I cannot put them in the right order or state all the delusions or hallucinations. There were some good things too. Once, I was looking at my hands and saw light all around with a rainbow coating. Sometimes I felt like a guru was showing me things like the nervous system, healing techniques, and other concepts. In a way, I was lucky not to have full-blown psychosis. By deciding or affirming that most of what was happening were just delusions, I was able to move through it. The worst happened when I was alone during coronavirus quarantine. But now, I am hopeful and can manage most of the voices by calling out curse words. The doctor has confirmed that with 5 years of medication, the hallucinations will go away. Story 32. Well, as someone who is quite reasonable and is often put into unreasonable situations, I thought I was Hades, the god of the dead. I remember dressing in all black and being very amped up. I came to in a psychiatric ward with a broken leg. Story 33. Parasites were by far my worst delusion. Hallucinating worm shapes under my skin, feeling worms wriggling around in my brain, and meticulously checking all my food shook me up and made me feel violated and helpless medically in a way that makes other delusions pale by comparison. It is what pushed me to finally start taking antipsychotics. Story 34. It started when I was home playing some Minecraft, just relaxing, when I saw a spider on my hand. Naturally, I swiped it off as quickly as I could but realized I didn't even feel it on my skin, though it was gone already. I went to the bathroom to wash my face and sat on the bed to calm down. I noticed in my peripheral vision a humanoid figure just staring at me. But when I focused on it, it disappeared. Several have appeared in the same way, just while I was going through the average day. It would happen when I was walking, in school, at home, anywhere. When I went to sleep, I heard some unintelligible whispering coming from behind me. After I started losing my mind over it, I told my mom, who said that I should talk to my psychologist about it. The psychologist later prescribed me some antidepressants, and the hallucinations went away after a while. I got off the medication later, which I now realize was a big mistake, and the hallucinations never came back. Story 35. Every single night, auditory hallucinations keep waking me. Various voices constantly say, "Hello? Hello, is anyone there? Hello? My name. Can you hear me? I need your help. Hello? Could you please help me? Come outside and help me. Hello? Are you there? My name." It is terrifying. Story 36. Since none of my hallucinations are scary, let me answer the question with the worst in irritation instead. Envision this. It is 2 a.m. or so, you are trying to sleep and you hear snoring. I do not live alone. My mother snores, so that makes it even worse because I get up to check if I am actually hearing something, even though I was not 5 minutes ago. Safe to say, I did not sleep. Story 37. I don't think I have ever told anyone about this because I feel so much shame when I think about it. At that time, I was in extreme depression due to burnout caused by untreated attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and prolonged grief disorder. I was staying with acquaintances in a squat because I had to move out of my previous house after a fight. I owned a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. I had pushed most of my friends away. I was on a waiting list for mental health care. When I went outside, I noticed that everyone I saw had monstrous and sickly features. Faces were wrinkled with large noses and big mouths. People appeared dirty and ugly, breathing hard, coughing, and spluttering. I stopped looking at people and only looked at the ground, but I could still hear them. At one point, I looked in the mirror and did not see my own face but my father's face. My father died of a brain tumor when I was 13. My face was his pale, sick face with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced because I thought I was completely crazy. I became convinced that my brain was rotting inside my head and that I was beyond help. That whole period is hazy, and I do not remember exactly how I got out of it, but I eventually got help. I can look in a mirror again now, but that image is burned into my retina. Story 38. When my mental health is really bad, I hallucinate corpses and detached limbs in my peripheral vision. I might think I see a hand on the floor in the subway and have to do a double take, then realize that nothing is there. Sometimes, when I am walking down the sidewalk, I see bodies up in the trees. It is really horrible because, even though I can usually double take and realize I am hallucinating, it still elicits the same primal immediate panic and can take some time for me to calm down. Story 39. When I moved out on my own at 17 due to an abusive family, I heard dogs chewing on bones in my house. I never saw the dogs or the bones, and I wasn't sure exactly why I knew the sound was made by dogs chewing bones. I just knew. I heard them in the living room and spare room. They were always in those two rooms, never the kitchen, my room, or the bathroom. At first, they only chewed at night, and for some reason, that didn't scare me much. It made me uneasy for sure, but I wasn't scared. Then I heard them during the day. They were outside during the day and inside at night. That was terrifying for some reason. I remember hearing them in the middle of the day and looking out all the windows, but I didn't see them. I heard them, and there were so many, more than ever, grunting, huffing, gnawing, crunching, and slobbering all over these massive bones. I don't know how I knew the bones were huge. I just knew. I hid under my blankets and shook for what felt like hours until they stopped chewing. Then they came inside that night and chewed all night. I didn't think much of the dogs until that incident. When I couldn't find them outside, I thought I should mention it to my doctor. He wanted me on antipsychotic medication, but I knew the dogs probably weren't real. If they were real, I'd deal with that myself, because if they were real, I wouldn't need medication. Somehow he let me walk out of there and go home that day without giving me medication or putting me on a hold. I think it was because I never lied to him. He had known me for 17 years, and I knew the dogs most likely didn't actually exist. It was weird. When the dogs were chewing, I was utterly convinced they were real, to the point of texting the property manager about it several times. But when I wasn't hearing them, I was pretty sure they were not real. He told me to come back immediately if the dogs started making other noises like barking or growling, or if I heard people instead of dogs, or if I saw them or felt them, or anything more than just hearing dogs chewing on bones. I promised him I would. 2 years prior, when I was brought in for making and nearly following through with a plan to kill myself, I was way too honest with him, and he sent me to an inpatient psychiatric hospital. So I think it was my honesty that kept me out of the hospital when I told him about the dogs. Story 40. I often experience auditory hallucinations, such as hearing a dog collar jingling or people whispering. Sometimes, I also see peripheral shadow hallucinations. The worst is when I am trying to sleep and it sounds like people are mumbling, as if a television is on too loud in the next room. Once, it sounded like there was a whole gala happening in my living room. Story 41. When I was around 12, I started dealing with many mental health issues. I experienced psychosis for about a year. I would see what appeared to be a mostly faceless man in the shadows across the room when I went to bed many nights. It was not sleep paralysis, as I could still move, but I was often petrified and cried myself to sleep. This was over a decade ago, but remains a core part of my current sleep issues. There were other issues, but nothing as significant. I also no longer trust my own perception completely, even though I am much healthier now. Story 42. I took Adderall for a long time. That should explain enough. I started astral projecting into my own imagination and experiencing everything that happened as if I were actually there. Combined with the side effect of paranoia from Adderall, it basically made me live in my own nightmares sometimes. Don't get me wrong. There were many amazing experiences I got to have and feel, but the nightmares were very intense. Imagine your imaginary friend calling you worthless, giant maggots living inside you while you are still alive, rats bursting out of you from the inside, demons staring into your eyes from an inch away, just waiting. Things got hardcore. Story 43. Postpartum psychosis affected me deeply. I didn't know it existed. It brought up some childhood trauma and confused me for years. I was raised in a cult that promoted extreme end-of-the-world propaganda, violent and disturbing ideas no child should be taught as literal truths. After having my son, I became overwhelmed with fears that the world was ending, imagining zombies coming. I believed the only way to protect my child was to stay on the roof or put him in foster care so the government would be responsible for his safety. I am horrified to remember this. My son was fine and unharmed, but I was close to death due to not eating and experiencing a hemorrhage. To this day, I remain mindful of certain signs that indicate psychosis, though I never experienced postpartum psychosis again. This experience helped me recognize postpartum depression in others before anyone else noticed. Story 44. A few months after graduating high school, I had not slept for a week. I used a lot of cannabis and took over-the-counter cold medicine, which made me delusional. I thought the television was all a conspiracy to make me feel like a failure. Like in football, all I saw were players fumbling the ball. The newspaper was full of lies aimed at manipulating my feelings. I ended up in a detoxification facility for a week. Story 45. This was drug and antidepressant-induced psychosis. The scariest thing was not being able to tell if something actually happened, if I dreamed it, hallucinated it, or just imagined it. Everything melded together until I no longer had a grip on reality. Story 46. I dealt with this through my father. He is doing good work now and seems very healthy, but he would leave my teenage brother at home for a week and refuse to return home, moving between hotels across the state. Anyone with tinted windows was suspicious and wanted to hurt him. He believed he could hear angels and banish demons. I love him immensely, but there have been a few episodes to deal with, and when it is psychological, it can be really difficult to navigate. Every day is a new day and a new opportunity for growth. Story 47. I have schizophrenia and I experience psychotic symptoms daily. The worst delusion, in terms of fear and annoyance, is probably believing I am constantly being hunted down by some secret group I do not know of. The worst hallucination, fear-wise, is seeing figures in the hall, but the most annoying hallucination is seeing cats and dogs in areas where there are none. I live with 3 cats and 1 dog, so it becomes a real inconvenience even though it does not scare me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.